Hello and welcome to the Matthew Rocky Show for this week of February 21st. Thanks so much for joining us for the podcast today. We've got a lot to cover, and we're going to get started with what's going on in Ukraine, something that I'm sure is near and dear to the hearts and minds of all those listening. If you have not heard what's been going on, Moscow led attacks on military units in Ukraine, killed at least 8 people and wounded 14 others, Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs said on Thursday. Shortly after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in Ukraine, the country was attacked by land, air, and sea. Explosions were reported across the country, including in Ukraine's capital city, Kiev. The UN Security Council announced that they will vote Friday on a resolution that would condemn Russia's military aggression against Ukraine in, quote, the strongest terms, unquote. It also would demand an immediate halt to Russia's invasion and the withdrawal of all Russian troops. The final draft resolution obtained Thursday by the Associated Press would reaffirm the Council's commitment, quote, to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders, unquote. The Council is scheduled to vote at 3 p.m. Eastern Friday on the resolution. It also came out in the early morning hours today that Australia's Defence Minister, Peter Dutton, is calling out the Chinese regime leader, saying he wields the power to pressure Russian President Vladimir Putin over his invasion of Ukraine, but has, quote, chosen not to do that, unquote. Dutton told the Sky News Australia earlier this morning, quote, the world stands as one to condemn the actions of President Putin, except for the Chinese government. Tragically, this alliance that Russia and China have entered into should be deeply disturbing to the rest of the world. The silence from China has made them stand out from other world leaders who have publicly condemned Putin's actions. Both Dutton and Assistant Defense Minister Andrew Hastie said there would be many innocent victims of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Hastie told the Sky News Australia, innocent people will die at foul hands, and we condemn in the strongest possible terms today. Vladimir Putin told the world in the lead-up to Thursday's attacks on Ukraine that his operation aims to, quote, denazify, unquote, Ukraine, a country with a Jewish president who lost relatives in the Holocaust and who heads a Western-backed, democratically elected government. The Holocaust, World War II, and Nazism have been important tools for Putin in his bid to legitimize Russia's moves in Ukraine, but historians see this as a use of disinformation and a cynical ploy to further the Russian leader's aims. Please pray for the people of Ukraine and the world leaders involved. And not only that, but the people of Russia. It also came out that there are Russian citizens who are protesting their government's invasion of Ukraine. Not to mention, there have been countless sanctions put out on the Russian government and the country as a whole by world leaders from across the globe in response to the attacks. And everyone involved in the situation needs our prayers. We need to pray that the Lord would intervene, and especially pray for our Christian brothers and sisters in these countries. In the country of Ukraine, they are going to be the light. They have to be the light in this very, very dark season for the country. I have a personal friend in Ukraine who is a Ukrainian citizen and works in ministry there. And he says, quote, only 2 weeks ago, no one in Ukraine, including me and my wonderful team, believed it would come to this. We thought it was madness, unquote. And so I'm sure there's an element of shock that also exists there. One other thing that I thought of that I think may be helpful to point out here, I'm someone who is around the news constantly. I am one who is trying to stay updated, and I have stayed updated through my work in radio with what's going on a national level, on an international level, but also on a state and local level as well. And I see news stories every day that have lots and lots of really bad news, tragic stories, heartbreaking events that just are a painful reminder of the effects of sin. And so when a story like this comes out, as tragic and as horrible as this is, and as big of a deal as it kind of is, maybe this is some of that insensitivity of just being constantly around it. It doesn't seem that big of a deal to me. The effect of it is not does not play out as big as it would for someone who isn't staying up to date on a regular basis with the news. Because when this happens, an invasion of a country, it seems like a really big deal, something that is totally against the status quo and the norm. And the reality is there is no difference between this and any other story that we're going to pull from a news circuit on any other day, whether that's on a small level or on a big level, because it is equally evil, it is equally sinful, and is equally wrong in the eyes of God. But here's the perspective that I think is important, because I totally am not discrediting the magnitude and the ripple effects that are going to come as a result of what happened in Ukraine yesterday and what will continue to happen throughout today and onward. But for me, and for people like me who are constantly engrossed in what's going on in the culture, we can become a little bit desensitized to the element of the heartbreaking sin that is going on in our world. We can become a little bit too accustomed to it, to seeing it, and we can lose the heart that God has for people, and just the heartbreak that he feels when he sees people who choose to reject him and his son. On the other hand, there's people who this is a huge deal, and your fear level is going to increase because this seems totally against the status quo. It seems totally abnormal, and it seems like a really, really, really big deal. And I'm not saying that it isn't, but I think it's a really important time to remember that we serve a God who's omnipotent, he's omnipresent, he's in this situation just as much as he is on the days that we think everything is great. And we're not being told about something as tragic as this that's going on in our world. And we have to realize that we serve that God, and he's still in control, and he still is the God who can move mountains. And our biggest weapon in this situation, like any situation, is to pray and to trust it to him. So some encouragement as we consider everything that's going on, not only in Ukraine, but on all these stories. And we're going to jump to our next story right now. And this one is going back to the Freedom Convoy in Canada. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks. And one brief update I want to bring you up to date with, in case you didn't hear. On Wednesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that he is revoking the use of the Emergencies Act, saying the situation is no longer an emergency. Trudeau defended invoking the act in the first place, saying, quote, "It was the responsible and necessary thing to do," saying there is evidence that individuals wanted to undermine and even harm Canada's democracy. He made the announcement at a press conference in Ottawa on Wednesday while the Senate was debating whether to confirm the government's decision to invoke the act. In other COVID-19 related news, COVID-19 case and hospitalization rates increased among people who got a COVID-19 vaccine following the emergence of the Omicron variant, according to newly published data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. According to the data, which is submitted to the CDC by health departments across the country, the COVID-19 case rate is among fully vaccinated people rose by more than 1,000% between December 11th, 2021 and January 8th, 2022. Fully vaccinated refers to people who received 2 doses of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccines, or a single dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The CDC does not count a person as fully vaccinated until 14 days have elapsed since his or her final shot. The case rate among those who also received a booster dose skyrocketed by some 2,400% between those same dates. President Donald Trump's social media app, Truth Social, reached number 1 on Apple's App Store a day after it launched on Monday. That is according to iPhone chart data. As of Tuesday morning, more than 1.5 billion people had viewed the app in the App Store. More than 401,000 people were receiving notices that they were being placed on a wait list when they tried to sign up. Truth Social is currently only available on Apple platforms. It is not clear when it will be made available for Android phones. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis will sign a controversial bill granting immunity to hospitals against lawsuits related to their treatment of COVID-19, according to his office. Floridians have been bombarding his office, asking him to veto the bill because it offers protection from lawsuits only if medical providers follow government guidelines for treatment. For months, DeSantis has said he wants legal protection for doctors, allowing them to provide what they feel is best, even if those treatments don't align with the federal government's recommendations on how to treat COVID-19. To address the problem, the DeSantis administration has said that the State Department of Health would be updating its policies to expand freedoms in 3 areas related to COVID-19. One of the updated policies will shield doctors who offer medical treatment they feel is best for their patients and not force adherence to guidelines by the CDC. The new policies will buck CDC guidelines by also eliminating forced masking of employees, reducing COVID-19 quarantines in schools, child care centers, and workplaces to 5 days, and adding treatment guidelines, quote, empowering healthcare practitioners to follow science, unquote, and know the status quo, the office wrote in a news release prepared for the announcement. Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo, who was confirmed less than 24 hours earlier by the legislature to guide the state's medical policies, said that the new policies would partly address what made the hospital immunity bill so controversial. Kyle Rittenhouse has announced Monday that he will be launching a project that is seeking to hold news organizations accountable for their, quote, lies, unquote. Rittenhouse, 19, was acquitted in November 2021 for charges related to the shooting of 3 people during a night of riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin. He shared details of his new initiative during a special appearance on Tucker Carlson Tonight. The teenager says, quote, me and my team have decided to launch the Media Accountability Project as a tool to help fundraise and hold the media accountable for the lies they said and to deal with them in court. Rittenhouse goes on to say, quote, I don't want to see anybody else have to deal with what I went through, so I want to hold them accountable for what they did to me, unquote. Moving on to some stories now from the world of education, almost all of the nation's top 25 medical schools are incorporating ideas related to the critical race theory into mandatory training programs for students and staff. Critical Race Training in Education, a project founded by Cornell University law professor William Jacobson, was recently put online in a new database on America's most prestigious medical schools. The database finds that 23 of those 25 institutions maintain some form of mandatory student training or course related to CRT doctrines. The trainings can be targeted such as a new requirement for a major or a department or school-wide, the website states, noting that the subject of those trainings and coursework may be worded differently at individual schools. The database also observes that 17 schools have mandatory CRT training for employees. For example, Cornell's Weill Medical School requires all faculty and staff to complete, quote, anti-bias training, unquote, on an annual basis while it works to, quote, introduce additional educational content related to racism, social injustice, and social determinants of health into the medical curriculum. Well, could Algebra 2 soon be a high school requirement of the past? A bill making its way through the state legislature in Arizona is seeking to replace Algebra 2 with what some consider more useful math or finance classes instead. The bill passed the House and is now making its way through the Senate, but some say Algebra 2 is an essential college preparatory course. Algebra 2 can be a difficult class for students. Parents often say it's much harder than Algebra 1, but as it stands now, it's a requirement to pass Algebra 2 to graduate high school. But if HB 2278 passes through the legislature in Arizona, that would change. It's up to debate whether this would then lead to changes across the nation, but either way, Arizona could be setting a precedent. Well, nearly 2 years after the pandemic began, Portland's reputation for violence, homelessness, drug use, and riots continues to hamper the city's recovery. Now, Portland public schools are experiencing an 8% decline in enrollment. Enrollment at Portland Public Schools, the largest district in Oregon State, dropped nearly 7,000 students, or 8%, in the past 2 years, according to state data. Though enrollment has declined by 1.41% statewide, PPS had a larger loss of students at 3.84% in the same time frame. We've got one final story to cover, and this one is regarding a recall. Ford is recalling nearly 250,000 heavy-duty pickup trucks in the U.S. because the drive shafts can fracture and cause a loss of power. The recall covers certain F-250s and F-350 Super Duty pickups from the 2017 through 2022 model years. The trucks have gasoline engines and aluminum drive shafts. Ford says in government documents that heat and noise insulators below the body can loosen and touch the drive shaft, causing it to fracture. This could lead to a power loss or a loss of control if it hits the ground. Hey, this is Matthew Rocky, just wanting to thank you so much for taking the time to tune in for the podcast this week. I want to invite you to share your feedback or any thoughts you might have on the podcast. Just go to thematthewrockyshow.com and send us an email. You can also follow us on social media. We are at The Matthew Rocky Show on Instagram and Facebook, or at TM Rocky Show on Twitter. Into our final section of the Matthew Rocky Show for this week of February 21st. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in for the podcast this week. And I'm reminded how fast time flies. Maybe you haven't realized this, but we've got just 3 days left here in the month of February. And I know February is the shortest month, but either way, this month has seemed to just fly by. And maybe you have felt the same way. I want to look back on this week in history, a number of interesting notes and another reminder of how fast time really does fly. It was already 4 years ago now, back on February 21st, 2018, that the Reverend Billy Graham passed away at his North Carolina home at the age of 99. Of course, the most heard Christian evangelist in history. And I remember covering his passing on radio. And yeah, hard to believe that was already 4 years ago now. Also on the 21st, 1885, the Washington Monument was dedicated. And in 1972, President Richard Nixon landed in Beijing to begin his historic visit with China. It was in 1980, the Miracle on Ice took place in New York as the United States Olympic team upset the Soviets 4-3 on February 22nd. The U.S. team, of course, went on then to win the gold medal. You may remember that on February 23rd. The passing of Stan Laurel in 1965 in Santa Monica, California occurred. He was 74 at the time, and of course part of the historic and classic comedy team Laurel and Hardy, who many of you probably watched growing up. I know I certainly did, and have still enjoyed watching episodes from time to time. They were such a dynamic pair and definitely knew how to make their audiences laugh. Yesterday, February 24th in history, 1968, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached Andrew Johnson by a vote of 126-47 following his attempted dismissal of Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton. Johnson was later acquitted, though, by the Senate. And on this day, February 25th, some notes from history. First of all, 1919, Oregon became the first state to tax gasoline at 1 cent per gallon. And in 1913, the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was declared in effect by then Secretary of State Philander Chase Knox, giving Congress the power to levy and collect income taxes. So much that has happened over the years, and it's definitely interesting to take the time and look back on those highlights and sometimes lowlights. We're going to move into some stories now, beginning with what has happened in Denmark this week. This is a call no one wants to hear. Be on the lookout for a kangaroo. But that's exactly the call police in southeastern Denmark have had to make. They want the public's help in finding an escaped kangaroo after a video was filmed of a kangaroo, or at least what looked like a kangaroo, hopping through a field. So far, though, no one has reported a kangaroo missing, but authorities want residents to be on the lookout anyway, because oddly enough, this is not the first time that police in the area have had to hop to it to find a missing marsupial. In 2014, a kangaroo escaped from a nearby private animal farm. Speaking of farms, I have a friend who grows horse feed while his son polishes shoes. I mean, you could say he makes hay while the sun shines. All right, from New Hampshire, who'd be irked about parents building a big tree house for their 8-year-old son? Well, the answer would be the neighbors in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Parents say they told the neighbors they were going to be building an outdoor play area, but neighbors were shocked when that turned out to be a 168 square foot treehouse. Officials in the city ruled that the treehouse was more like a deck structure and needed to be set back from a neighbor's fence, which means it has to be moved. And I can just believe that is an incredible amount of work to move that, first off. But second of all, a 168 square foot treehouse? That's incredible. Speaking of things on the move, the moose that has been on the loose in Massachusetts has now been moved. State wildlife officials say the moose seen roaming around the city of Marlborough was finally tracked down, and authorities were able to get close enough to tranquilize the moose and take it to a wildlife management area where it was eventually relocated. Another animal on the loose. This is out of California. Of course, they've got a bear on the California state flag, but officials in Lake Tahoe are trying to flag down the bear that has been wreaking havoc on the area. They've been blaming it all on a 500-pound bear named Hank the Tank, at least nicknamed that. But it turns out it's not just Hank the Tank. He does have some accomplices. They've been blamed for 150 bear-related incidents in the last 7 months that have happened across Northern California and Nevada, and police are hoping they can capture the 3 bears and relocate them to a more suitable habitat. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that it's just not Hank the Tank. I mean, that's a lot of damage. They said there's been damage on more than 30 homes in that time, and I'm sure that's more than one bear can bear. We're going to move into a story out of Alaska now, another territory that generally includes a lot of bears and wildlife, but this story is not about that. Imagine an opal bigger than a brick. Well, there is such a gemstone, and it's been sold at an auction in Alaska. The opal, one of the largest gem-quality opals in existence, went for nearly $144,000 in an auction this past Sunday. Nicknamed the Americus Australis, weighing in at more than 800 carats, the opal was originally, or most recently, kept in a linen closet at a home near Anchorage by Fred Von Brandt, whose family has deep roots in the gem and rock business. He says that the opal has been in the family since 1960. Well, you can understand people wanting to get their hands on cones in the summer if they're filled with ice cream, but authorities have no idea in Boston why people have been putting their hands on traffic cones and throwing them under a bridge. This month, workers collected more than 100 traffic cones from on the ice under the Massachusetts Avenue Bridge, which links Boston and Cambridge. The cones were part of a bicycle safety pilot program, so it's unclear why the cone chuckers are doing this. Speaking of driving, a driver in South Florida is lucky to be alive after a drawbridge raised while his vehicle was still on it. The incident actually happened in October, but recently released video shows how scary the moment actually played out near Palm Beach. The car is stalled while on the drawbridge, but the operator raised the bridge before it was cleared. The driver can be seen trying to exit the vehicle as it begins to tip. Ultimately, the car slid down and the driver was unharmed, but local authorities launched an investigation and the bridge operator was fired. Well, is your mom your biggest fan? Reporter Miles Harris's mother, Sandy, certainly is his. She stopped by to surprise him at work. The problem is, Miles is a reporter for the ABC 6 channel in Ohio, and he was in the field reporting on camera when his mom pulled up behind him and shouted, "Hi, baby." The mother and son have now gone viral after Miles posted the video of his mom's visit on social media. Well, just a mom trying to be there for her son, and certainly nothing wrong with that, but I can definitely understand the embarrassment of that happening when you're at work trying to get things done, especially when you're recording for TV. A 91-year-old man is considered the top employee by his bosses at an Arby's in Indiana. WNDU reports Jack Burkett works at the fast food chain in Elkhart, and his ties with the restaurant date much further than his first day of employment a decade ago. In fact, it was where he and his late wife would come often. After his wife died, he knew he needed to find something to do to keep himself occupied, so he came in and asked if they needed someone to do the lobby and offered to do it for free. General Manager Rosemary Grasso recalled that she told Jack that they wouldn't be able to let him do it for free, but they would hire him. Burkett said he wanted to start the day of that conversation, but took the compromise of beginning his employment the following day. It turns out the 91-year-old is so dedicated to his work at the company that the supervisors and managers don't even need to look at the schedule to see when he's coming in. 10 years later, he's the most dedicated employee that anyone would find, they say. Burkett says, quote, "Just killing time. I don't know what to say. I just do a lot of stuff," unquote. Burkett has eaten a lot of Arby's sandwiches, but he says that he credits apple cider vinegar as one of the factors for his longevity. Burkett says he plans to turn in no 2-week notice anytime soon, stating that Arby's is where he wants to retire. And not only is that dedication, that is a very, very long career, because you got to assume that Mr. Burkett had a career well before jumping into this 10-year stint in fast food. Well, I had a letter get sent in to me from a student. They wanted to send this out to algebra, and I know I talked about algebra 2 possibly being a thing of the past in Arizona schools, but somebody wrote in, they said they wanted me to read this letter to algebra. "Dear algebra, stop asking me to find your ex. She's not coming back, and I don't know why." All right, here's some other notes that are amusing. "I started getting threats after wearing paper towels for a hat. Apparently, that means there's a bounty on my head. I know a guy who fell into a hole of water, and I mean, you can't really blame him because he couldn't see that well. But to be honest, he also found out recently he was colorblind. I asked him how he felt when he found out, and he was like, well, it came totally out of the purple. I should have been sad when the batteries in my flashlight died, but to be honest, I was actually delighted." And 2 last ones for you. "eBay is useless. I tried to buy a lighter there yesterday, and all they had was 10,534 matches. So hopefully you have better results if you use eBay. People have been saying that my parachute company has substandard products. But to be honest, I have yet to have a customer come back to complain. Oh my. All right, we're going to wrap things up here. Thanks so much for tuning in for the Matthew Rocky Show this week, February 21st. We'll see you next time.